All right, cool. So look at your handout. We're going to continue talk about Russia. Um, so on our handout, we talked about the Russian Empire. We talked about a family called the Muscovites. On the section it says the Russian Empire. We mentioned that they um, Moscow called themselves the Third Rome. They saw themselves as continuing the role of Orthodox political religious leadership after the fall of Constantinople. In fact, we also mentioned because they want to tie themselves into Rome, what did they call their leaders? The Tsar. But Russia, we saw, had a problem that they were virtually landlocked. We said virtually because technically they do have an ocean, but what's the ocean they have? The Arctic Ocean, right? That's not exactly a recipe for success. When we look at Russia, we see that the Arctic Ocean is definitely not something that is going to be something you're going to be able to build on and expand through. So that's a problem. You have the Arctic Ocean. And we also saw that they're also surrounded by these regional powers. What I mean by that is they have like the Safavid Empire to their south. They have the Ottoman Empire to the southwest, China. So it's not like they can just like easily take these areas over. They're kind of in a bad situation. Now they do decide that they can expand one direction. Russia originally is this region right here. I think on your screen, on my screen it looks like mustardy or something like that, but yours it looks brown here. And they decide that they're going to actually expand. We'll write down eastward across Siberia. Eastward. We will get that after we finish this one. Yeah, across Siberia. They're going to go eastward across Siberia. And the thing about the people of Siberia, we've actually talked about that. Again, this is what some of the people of Siberia look like. These are the indigenous people. They're these non-white people that live in Siberia. We'll write down that they expanded at the expense of these indigenous people. The word indigenous means native people, and these indigenous people are the ones taking over. They expanded eastward across Siberia at the expense of these indigenous people. These non-white people don't have guns. These non-white people don't have steel, and the Russians do. And so just like we have manifest destiny from the east to the west coast, they have manifest destiny of a different sort from the west to the east. Below that, Siberia is cold for sure, but it does have a lot of forests. And so it says the good thing about taking over Siberia is money was made from fur trapping. You know, there's like all these rare animals that we as humans like mink, for example, is a type of rare fur, and you can actually get a lot of money from that. And so money was made from fur trapping. And in fact, it says on your handout, they settled as far as, in fact, if we went off the map, what part of our country is here? Alaska. They went as far as Alaska. In fact, they own Alaska all the way to 1867. We buy Alaska from Russia. And at the time, people thought, that's a waste of money. Why would you basically spend millions of dollars on ice? It turns out oil is a thing. In fact, there's so much oil and natural gas in Alaska that every year, if you live in Alaska, you get a check from the state of Alaska just for living there, saying, here's your cut of the oil, here's your cut of the gas money. So if you move to Alaska, you can make some oil and gas money. You know what? Maybe. It says on the handout, Siberia was also used for something else. In fact, if I have a prisoner, or if there's someone who questioned my authority and they're in Moscow and I arrest them, hey, if I send them out to Siberia, if I send them to jail, which they did, what would happen even if they broke out of jail? I mean, you're probably safer in jail than out of jail. Just to give you a size of this distances, this bar right here, that's 1,000 miles. I mean, even if you were in Alaska, if you were in Siberia, it's like 3,000 miles to get back to anywhere you'd want to be. So it's like a natural prison. We have a name for this. It says on the handout, Siberia was later used as a penal colony. That word penal is like from the word penalty or penalize. It's Penal. Siberia was a penal colony. Even if you broke out, where are you going to go? Alcatraz, that was, but it's not anymore. I think it's like a tourist attraction. So what to do now that I've beat up and conquered these different regions? Well, it says Orthodox missionaries Christianized much of Siberia. So they sent out missionaries, just like white Europeans tried to Christianize the Native Americans, just like they tried to Christianize enslaved Africans. Here, these Orthodox missionaries want to Christianize these non-white people of Siberia. However, if you look at these other parts of the Russian Empire, like these types of people conquered near the Black Sea, these people conquered down here in places called Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. What religion are these people going to be? Absolutely right. We'll write down on the handout that, but Islam remains strong in the south. So we have Christianity spreading, but Islam is still a huge presence in the south. We have a starred term on your handout, the word Cossacks. Make sure you use your textbook, whether it's the PDF or the Cengage website, to access and to tell me what is a Cossack. I'll be checking that on the notebook tomorrow. So things don't go great for Russia during a time that we call the time of troubles. In fact, it was a time of political instability. In fact, this time of political instability happened during a time of climate change. What was the time of climate change called at this time? Yeah, we'll write down during the Little Ice Age. During the Little Ice Age. Man, the Little Ice Age was a problem because we couldn't grow things the way we used to. We couldn't feed our people the way we used to. And if things are going wrong with the climate, we often get mad at our political leaders. And sometimes we say, well, I know it's not your fault, the climate change, but how you dealt with it wasn't good. That's probably one of the main reasons people have argued Trump lost, was that it was believed he mismanaged the pandemic. Like, obviously, he didn't cause the pandemic, but many people felt he didn't handle it the way he should have handled it. And here, people feel the Little Ice Age isn't the way it should have been handled. We're going to have our own Little Ice Age on Monday and Tuesday because we're supposed to have the coldest recorded record in 70 years in Houston. I think some models, there's various models, weather is imprecise science. Some models say we could be like 6 or 7 degrees on Tuesday in February of 2021. It would be, but I think actually we're supposed to have like 7 days of like being in the 30s and 40s. So yeah, it's supposed to snow or freezing rain on Sunday night, Monday, and if it gets down to 17 on Tuesday, that snow or ice isn't going anywhere, and so it could be a challenge. So we are going to have our own Little Ice Age coming up. Hopefully they will as well. But good news for Russia, there is a family called the Romanovs. And we'll write down that this new family, we'll write down that they restored order. Now, you may have heard of this family before. There's a cartoon popular in the 90s called Anastasia. It's like this Russian princess movie. And that movie, Anastasia, if you've ever seen it, it's actually about the Romanov family. It says on the handout, they were like the royal family, like they're the ones who took over. They restored order. The Romanovs. Now, even though this one rich family restores order, in general, things are not so hot in Russia. In fact, peasants, we'll write down, were bound to the land. They were bound or tied to the land. Not physically tied, but like economically. In fact, you had to basically work for a landlord. You had to farm for him. You couldn't really leave. You were really just tied to this rich guy's piece of property. And we've talked about a word like this before of poor white people who work on a land for protection and they can't really leave. We called those serfs. But listen, when we've talked about serfs, we talked about that during the Middle Ages. And then you know what Europe did? They kind of got rid of it and they moved on beyond that. Not Russia. In fact, we'll write down, yes, these people are known as serfs, which is SERFS. And Russia held on to serfs all the way, you'll write down, until 1861. That's a ridiculous number. The rest of Europe got rid of serfs 500 years before Russia. This is one of the reasons why when other European countries look at Russia, they think you guys are backwards, you are primitive, you're literally not on the same level. You guys are doing stuff we did 500 years ago, Russia. And that's why a lot of Europeans kind of see Russia as barely European. Like, yes, you guys are white, and yes, you're European, but you're like barely in the white European club. You guys are backwards. And this is going to be something Russia's going to be fighting for a long time, this perception. In fact, how pervasive was serfdom? How rough was it? It says on the handout that Russian serfdom was in some ways similar to slavery, with half of the population being a serf. Half of the population tied to some other person's land. Like peasants in grinding poverty. And well, how many people are rich and wealthy? How many people like own the land? We'll write down landowners were 2% of the population. 2% of the population owned all of the land. And most of Russia, very poor. Well, I mean,
most of Russia is just like inherited.
So who's going to solve this problem? This guy, Peter the Great. In fact, the greatest of the Romanov dynasty was, well, Peter the Great. Well, what makes this guy so great? Well, one of the things about him is he kind of understood Russia has a problem. And he doesn't want his country to be a laughingstock. He doesn't want his country to be like the trash country of the world. So what is he going to do? Well, he looks around for who's the most successful. And if you look around, what types of countries in the 15, the 16, and now the 1700s are the most successful on planet Earth? Who else? Portugal, who else? And who else other than Britain? Two more by name we should know. The Netherlands, for sure. What else? One more. No, not Italy. The most successful countries on the planet in the 15, 16, 1700s. We have Spain, we have Portugal, we have Britain, we have Netherlands. One more being left out. In fact, they have a huge empire in the Americas. People still speak their language. Millions of people speak this language in the Americas to this day. We already did Portugal. We already did Spain again. What'd you say? France, right? In fact, not just in Canada, a bunch of the islands, like in the Caribbean, speak French. So there's a lot of French. Now, what part of Europe are all those countries in? Geographically, north, south, east, west. The West. And so what he realizes really quickly is that the most important countries on the planet are Western European. We'll write down, he understood the rise of Western Europe. He understood that the rise of Western Europe was due to, what do all those countries have in common? What do they invest in? What do they have that makes them powerful? Well, I mean, every white person has guns, so that doesn't make them different than Italy, who has guns. But Italy doesn't have 13 colonies. What made them different? What these Western countries? What do they all have in common? Portugal, Spain, France, Netherlands, England. How did they conquer across the planet? So they have a navy, right? We'll write down that their success was due to their navy. Netherlands is a ridiculously small country, but they have one of the biggest, most powerful, most impressive naval forces on the planet. England is a small island. They had a great navy. They were sea-based empires. So he understands that if Russia is going to be like these other countries, you know what he needs to build? What's he got to build? A navy. But again, we're back to the same problem. I've got the Arctic Ocean to deal with. All right, well, what to do? He, on the handout, understood his empire was vast, but backwards compared to much of Europe. Like, yeah, I've got a big empire, but my empire is like a bunch of trees and cold. And in fact, the Netherlands, which is right here, like this red dot is like as big as the Netherlands, you know? And it's way richer than Russia. England is this like little island, and it's way wealthier than all of Russia. So it's big, but it just isn't wealthy. And he wants to fix that. It says on the handout that he was committed to, and if I want to be like everyone else, I need warm water stat, like as quickly as possible. If you look at the map, what are some of my choices for warm water? to take over, obviously. So Black Sea is one option in the southwest. If you look at the Black Sea, there's something great about this pick. Who controls the Black Sea according to this map? And what do we know about them, I don't know, religiously? They're Muslim. In fact, Russia has big beef with the Ottomans because what did the Ottomans do that was heartbreaking for Orthodox Christians? They did something. They did destroy Constantinople. In fact, the world's largest Orthodox church was turned into what? A mosque. And they changed the name of Constantinople to Istanbul. We have beef with the Ottomans. This is a great opportunity to go to war. It says on the handout, he was committed to taking the Black Sea from the Ottoman Empire. The Black Sea from the Ottoman Empire. Well, is that okay? I mean, should I be like going to war? I'm a Christian country. I'm an Orthodox country. Should we be going to war just like over a piece of water? I mean, is that what Jesus would want us to do? Well, how do we deal with that? Well, this is how they dealt with it. It says on your handout, they saw this conflict in religious terms of Orthodox Christians in a crusade against Islam. So this isn't just like a random war. This is a crusade. If it's a crusade, you know who's really behind it if it's a crusade? God is. We talked about the Crusades in the 1200s when like Europe tried to free the Holy Land from Muslim rule. And what did the Pope say would happen to you if you died on crusade fighting Muslims? Go to heaven, right? So that's how they kind of framed this. It's not just like, oh, I want water. You know what? This is for Jesus. It's not for me. It's for the big guy, right? It's a crusade against Islam. Now, even though he's got a great motivation in his mind, he gets some fresh, warm water. It's a different religion. These are the bad guys. They destroyed our city of Constantinople. Even though he has all that, he saw on your handout limited gains. It doesn't really pan out. Doesn't work out. Ottoman Empire is not a chump empire. You might remember they've actually, if you look at the map, they've conquered a bunch of white Southeastern Europeans. They turned a bunch of white Europeans into janissaries, these slave soldiers. So they're not an empire that you can, right now, just take out without serious effort. So it doesn't work out. So never mind about the Black Sea. What's my backup? If you look to the northwest, there's another piece of water called the Baltic. And someone else controls that. In fact, on the map, who is directly north and northeast of the Baltic? Sweden. Now, we've talked about a lot of countries in AP World. Have we spent a lot of time talking about the powerhouse of the Swedish army? We've never talked about, I've literally never said the word Sweden, I think, this semester. We talked about what now? Swedish fish, okay. So, not about Sweden. So, they do fight a war over the Baltic. It says on the handout that he sought to westernize his army. Westernize means to like modernize, to copy what Western Europe is doing. And in fact, he fought what's called the Great Northern War against Sweden, and he won access to the Baltic Sea. So it works out, right? Fighting Muslims didn't work out. A Christian country fighting another Christian country works out just fine. He got access to the Baltic Sea. In fact, he gets everything in purple on this map, which is kind of cool because he gets like a little bit, not like the biggest, but a little piece on the Baltic Sea. And if I have the Baltic Sea, I can have Navy, I can sail. Oh, there's England, I'm still probably not going to have access to bring enslaved Africans. Probably not going to still have access to have 13 colonies, but at least I have something, right? And that's a good thing. It says on the handout, on this captured land, he built a brand new city. The city's name is St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg. He actually moved the capital there, to St. Petersburg. Because Moscow is cool, but it's not on the coast. St. Petersburg is. So he built St. Petersburg. And this city is super important. It actually served as his window to Europe. His window to access Europe. Window and then Europe. What I mean by that is it's just like a small window to Western Europe. It's not like he full on is on the Atlantic Ocean, but he can actually now hang out with the cool European countries? Well, let's look at architecture because look, I want to be like those successful countries. I want to be like them. I want to look like them. And again, when we look at this picture, this is a what is this again? It's a church. Now, for me personally, if I didn't have the crosses and I didn't know anything about Russian history, I would I would say for me, looks kind of Asian, looks like a mosque or maybe is that India? You know, like that's for me what I would have said. But it turns out it's a mosque. I mean, it's a church, right? It's an Orthodox church. Does that look real in your minds? When you think of Europe, do you think yes, Europe is filled? No. And so you know what? Peter the Great says, you know what we need to do? If we really want to look like Europe, we need to like literally look like Europe. So he gets to build St. Petersburg from scratch. And imagine if you got to transfer high school to like where no one knows you. They don't know like your phases in junior high you went through or like your stylistic, you know, you could like totally reinvent yourself. And that's what they decided to do with this new capital. Look at St. Petersburg. Is that the same style? No. In fact, this is more of a European feel. Like if I saw this and I didn't know, I'd be like, yep, Europe. I don't know where, but that's definitely Europe. What's that? Well, who did the White House has columns and stuff like that, and we copy Europe, we copy Rome. All these pillars are like Greco-Roman stuff, right? And actually, there is a palace he copies as well. Now, this is like the worst picture of this palace ever, but I'm just showing you this particular picture that I'm about to show you because you'll see the similarities. This picture is of Versailles. Yes. Now, that's in France. Now, this picture doesn't look very impressive, but I'm going to tell you Versailles is the most impressive palace on the planet. We'll study that more in detail and look at really much better pictures and video when we get to the French Revolution. But Versailles was like the #1 palace on the planet. Everyone wanted to copy Versailles. Everyone wanted to be like Versailles. What country is Versailles in? Yeah, that's in France. And actually, we talked about Versailles before that the King of France used Versailles as this like party palace. And actually, they used it to help control people because let's say that you didn't like the king, you didn't agree with him. He'd ask you, hey, come out, hang out with me at Versailles. We'll drink, we'll gamble, we'll have women. And all of a sudden, you forgot about your questions and you forgot about you not liking the king because Versailles was so awesome. Obviously, trying to copy what all these countries look like. It says on your handout, it was inspired by French architecture, his new city, French architecture, particularly in parentheses, you'll write down Versailles. Versailles. Now, last two lines, and then we're going to move to the Mughals. He wanted also to westernize Russian elites. If you look at a picture of Peter the Great, he thinks, look, we got to dress like other white people, dress like other Europeans. And there's a fashion that Russians typically had that's not okay anymore. Russian men typically wore beards. Now, even for our culture today, what's the last president you can think of that had a beard or a mustache or facial hair in general? Last president. Well, he did have a beard, but we've had other people since Lincoln. But I mean, imagine if like Barack Obama had like a mustache, like that'd be kind of weird. Or if Joe Biden started to grow, a mustache. I mean, these are things we just, fashion changes and like facial hair is not a thing we have with like our elected leaders anymore. And so, you know what? Peter the Great, he doesn't have a beard, even though that was the style Russians had. He said, guys, Europeans don't wear beards. You know what? Neither do we. We'll write down where it says one in westernized Russian elites, they had to shave their beards. It wasn't okay. It wasn't cool anymore. We want to look like the cool Western European nations. They had to shave their beards. Last thing, he wanted to create what is called an autocracy. An autocracy, this is an example of an autocracy, is something we call absolutism. And if you are living in a government that embraces absolutism, guess how much control the government has over your life? Absolute, right? And says that he had control over church and state. He had control over church and state. Now, I want you to write down one last thing about this control over church and state. I want you to write down a concept we've talked about before. I want you to write down the phrase, the divine right of kings. Divine right of kings. Divine. This is something that he'd be okay with. Listen, a divine right of kings, who is responsible for me being the king? Ultimately, who put me on the throne? God. And if God put me on the throne, who ultimately is the only one who can take me out? God. So it doesn't matter like if I have your consent or if you want to vote for me. The only thing matters is God made me. God will be the one that'll break me. So here is Russia desperately trying to modernize. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and stop here. We'll take a bit of a break, and then we'll come back after lunch to record our second video on the Mughals.